And Emeritus Professor Ramesh Thakur is a Senior Research Fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. He has written recently and instructively about the very issue we have been discussing. He has written, and I quote, "Freedom died of COVID. Unchecked medical tyranny seems hell-bent on destroying freedom in Western society, with the presumption that we're all sick, whether we know it or not, or will soon be sick, and we must be dealt with as potential germ-ridden disease carriers who pose a constant threat to all others," unquote. Well, Gladys Berejiklian yesterday said we'd have to assume that everyone has the virus. Listen to this.
The most important message I'd like to give everybody is every time we leave the home, we have to assume that ourselves or other people around us have the virus. That's the way we have to live during the lockdown and beyond. We just have to assume that we have the virus or that others around us have, and we have to act accordingly.
Gladys, that is ignorant rubbish. Writes Professor Thakur, in the name of keeping us safe, the entire machinery of state, backed by a fear-peddling media and unprecedented censorship of social media by big tech, has been let loose upon the citizens. Well, that's about it. It bears repeating, doesn't it? Quote, "Unchecked medical tyranny seems hell-bent on destroying freedom in Western society, with the presumption that we're all sick, whether we know it or not, or will soon be sick, and we must be dealt with as potential germ-ridden disease carriers who pose a constant threat to all others. In the name of keeping us safe, the entire machinery of state, backed by a fear-peddling media and unprecedented censorship by social media, by big tech, has been let loose upon the citizens." Professor Thakur joins us. Ramesh, thank you for your time. Can freedom as we know it survive this onslaught?
Well, I certainly hope so, Alan. But I must say I've been absolutely befuddled. It's impossible for me to comprehend how we allowed the state to get to this situation that it can dictate to us who we see, when we see, how many we can have in our home, all sorts of things. And many of those restrictions in the first round, as we know, were counterproductive against scientific good advice.
I mean, you say, and you're right, every utterance of government in this climate is undebated and backed by alarmist media headlines. You then say, dare to disagree, and social media shuts you down. And then you say all the institutions that we've relied on to keep abuses of power by the executive in check have failed us: parliaments, opposition parties, the judiciary, and sceptical and investigative press. You mentioned, quote, snitching on your neighbours. That happened to Barnaby Joyce yesterday. I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, how is this different? How is this different from Russia or North Korea?
Well, this is not the Australia I knew. This is not the Australia I love. And on that point also, if you believe in the very idea of Australia, if you identify with Australia, you have to ask, what was Morrison thinking as Prime Minister when he backed out of the challenge to WA's closure of borders? I mean, this is one country. What do state premiers think they're doing, stopping us from travelling?
Liberal government. What if they come at us with a vaccine passport? They won't call it a vaccine passport, a digital certificate. But as you say, we'll end up with a nearly irreversible consolidation of big government, big tech and big pharma. And you then said,
absolutely,
on the back of the global pandemic, governments have taken control of every aspect of our lives. Healthy people who've committed no crimes have been put under house arrest for prolonged periods of time in order to buy, quote, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. How have, Ramesh, how have we, the public, we're the masters, politicians the servants, we're the masters, how have we allowed this to happen?
Well, we should be the masters, but in that article I finish off with a great quote from the great American broadcaster, Ed Morrow, that a nation of sheep will beget government of wolves.
Yes.
That seems to have happened in Western country after Western country. We copied China of all countries, their authoritarian model, and we are becoming like China in terms of what the government has started to do.
But as you say, the state have asserted the right to order who we meet, how many, where, for how long. Faces are muzzled. You can't hug. What businesses may remain open, for how long, serve how many people, what must close, whether religious services are permitted or not. how far and where we can travel, which health services are to operate under what conditions, including overriding the screenings, and this is the key, and treatments of deadlier diseases than COVID, and all without any accountability. None of this, Ramesh, none of this is debated.
No accountability, no exit strategy. They don't know the meaning of liberal. But then, of course, you have a prime minister whose understanding of free speech means how many jobs it creates. So what can you do?
What can
liberal
you do?
Name only, line of government.
I mean, then you say the police, and you said there's no polite way to say this, but in Melbourne last year, and again more recently, Victorian police have often acted like thugs in uniform, indulging their inner bully. I mean, you've asked, as I have, in shock and dismay about, quote, the extent to which majorities in literate countries can be successfully terrorised into surrendering civil and individual liberties. I'm bewildered as to how this has happened.
Well, I think we are of a generation which understands this, a generation which remembers millions of lives that were sacrificed in order to preserve these freedoms. And now we are only too willing to say, enslave us, entrap us,
yes.
Just keep us safe. Let's make us live another 2 weeks. You know, the old saying that we use in conflict and war situations. Yeah. I'd rather die standing up than live for another 10 years on my knees. We've forgotten the lessons of that. I cannot understand it.
No, nor can I. I mean, you've got the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, I mentioned this last night. He's legislated against any COVID restrictions, and he said that our political and ideological enemies must be thinking, quote, if we can instill panic and fear, we can get them to close down their whole society, cripple the strongest economy in the world. And there we are. Ramesh, good to talk to you. You're doing wonderful work.
Thanks, Alan.
Wonderful
That
work.
reminds me, I think our biggest hope is America and states like Florida and Texas.
Yes. Oh, gosh. What a terrible world. That is Professor Ramesh Thakur from the ANU. And we'll be talking to him again. How true is all of that?